He has returned, the scourge of the Imperium, the arch-traitor of mankind, the root of all evil, the avatar of ruin, the dark master of chaos, the destroyer of Escador, the butcher of Ishvan, the cancer of the Ethereal Council. He has many names, but I will always call him Father. For 10,000 years, the galaxy had thought him dead, but I knew better. I knew his malice would not end so easily, knew that he would claw his way back from the grave he so rightfully deserves, sooner or later. Even after he betrayed me and tried to kill me and my brothers, even after everything I did in the rebellion to oppose him, we're still connected, still linked by the genetic and spiritual ties that bind every Space Marine to his Primarch. Sometimes I think the Emperor made his creation too well, other times not well enough. I knew he was alive and plotting from his place between life and death, scheming to cross back and claim vengeance for his past defeat. Because if there is one thing we still have in common, it's our determination. Neither of us have ever been able to take defeat and strive to just give up. And so I wandered, fighting ruin everywhere I went, in the dark places between stars where the Imperium feared to tread. I sought a way to finish what Fulgrim and the Emperor had started on Terra, a way to avenge my lost brothers, a way to kill the chosen of the Chaos Gods. For my sins, I found one. On the fringes of the galaxy, where gods and demons fear to tread, baited in blackless light, with a man even more desperate than I, my sole companion, I found the power I needed to bring an end to my legion's shame. It took us, remade us, and spat me back out. As far as I know, my companion is still in there, and though there's little emotion left to me, I still tremble when I think of his fate, and of what he might have become by the time he too is released. I am not sure the galaxy is ready for one such as him, but at the same time, he may be its only hope against what else is coming. Such things I have seen, such wonders and horrors, so many things I once would have thought impossible, had I even been able to imagine them. The galaxy is much bigger, so much stranger than we ever suspected, and so much more beautiful too, even though it took me centuries to be able to see it, that I will never be able to truly appreciate it again. For all its horrors, it is a place worth fighting to defend, a place worth dying for. And now, at the end of the age, my father rises from his throne once more, and the universe will scream before the end. Psychers across the stars weep without knowing why, sensing the terrible darkness that has returned to haunt the galaxy. The servants he has seated within the ranks of those who would oppose him know he is back as their leashes tighten around their necks, and they go about their appointed task with renewed vigor, afraid of failing their master and God. In the eye of terror, demon primarchs steer as ancient oaths of loyalty tug at their monstrous souls once more. It will be some time before they all realize what has happened, and by then it might be too late. The gate has been unlocked by those who did not know better. Its hinges have been oiled with the blood of my fallen brothers, and he has stepped back through. He is here, but so am I. The Battle of Macragge, Part 3. Know my name. In the skies above Macragge, the fleet of the Black Crusade, marshaled by Marius Gage, was still engaged with the planet's orbital defenses and the ships of the warbands that had gathered in answer to Marneus Calgar's call for reinforcements. The engagement had been going on without pause since the Sacrifice Sun's armies had reached the surface, and Macragge's orbit was filled with the husk of dead ships slowly turning into the void. The planet's defenders had been crippled by the Loathted Ones, but there were still many left unwilling to abandon the Legion's homeworld and run, and the captain of the Black Crusade reveled in the slaughter of such prey. On the bridge of Macragge's treachery, flagship of Marius Gage himself, the thing that had once been known as Edward de Lecoeur, stirred on his command throne. It had been centuries since the captain had fused with his ship, becoming little more than a head and a torso bound to an increasingly complex network of cables, not all of which were mechanical in nature. Secondary hearts pumped blood. What? Secondary hearts pumped black blood in his remaining flesh, and nerve clusters transmitted his will across the corrupt vessel faster than even the most perfectly trained bridge crew. Centuries ago, before being forced to flee from the Imperial Navy under, entirely true by the way, accusations of piracy, Edward had been the lord and master of the crew's shining spear. After the loss of that ship to the endless battles of the Ruinstorm, he had been recruited by Marius Cage, and once he had proven his skills through a series of brutal engagements with the warlord's rivals, he had been selected to become the captain of the newly constructed Macragge's treachery. Had he known in advance what the post would entail, Delacour would have run as fast as he could and to the warp with his privileged position among Cage's circle. But by the time he realized what the heretics were doing to him, it was already too late. Since then, his mind had been transformed by the fusion with the ship to the point where he couldn't remember why he had feared this fate in the first place. Edward could sense every kill of the treachery, as if it were committed by his own hands, and he exulted in the power he wielded. For too long, the flagship had been consigned to Cal's immediate surroundings, where Gage's power was all but unchallenged. The Crusade was the first true war into which it had taken part, and it was glorious. Between the battle at the system's edge and this one, the fleet had crushed the pathetic slaves of the Avenging Sun with ease, all thanks to the Sacrifice Sun's superior planning. Edward had suggested to his lord that they could simply bombard Macragge from orbit until nothing remained but dust and ash. But Cage had rejected him. Apparently, he wouldn't trust his father's body had truly been destroyed until he had seen it with his own burning eyes. Edward admired the strength of his master's hatred, and he had to admit that the energy shields above the fortress of Hera were even more powerful than he had anticipated. So he guessed Cage had been right in insisting on a ground assault after all. From what the ship apexes were telling him, the situation planetside was going well, with the Black Crusade having finally reached the fortress itself. The final battle was taking place, and Edward expected to receive word from Cage's triumph soon. He wondered what, if anything, the Sacrifice Son had planned to do after he finally completed his millennia-long revenge against the Gene-Sire who had sent him to his death during the legendary days of the Great Rebellion. He was pondering these matters while idly taking apart another frigate, when suddenly every sense he had linked to the treachery started shrieking, along with every alarm on the ship's bridge. He tore his attention away from the frigate just in time to see through the treachery's eyes as a rift opened in the turbulent tides of warp space, some distance further away from Macragge than the Black Crusade's fleet. Ship after ship emerged from the rift, bypassing the path of glory entirely, but Edward didn't care for how impossible that was. He was too busy gawking in shock and horror at the vessel leading the new armada. The Macragge's Honor, the ancient flagship of the 13th Legion, built in the great shipyards of Mars at the command of the false emperor himself, and given to his son Guilliman as the greatest vessel of the Ultramarine fleet. He recognized her from the data stored in some of the oldest cogitators of the ship, cannibalized from much more ancient vessels during the treachery's construction. Though the battleship had greatly changed since the last of these records, its shape and sheer size made it unmistakable even before its identity broadcast hit the treachery's receivers in a machine howl of domination and superiority. The biggest difference, and the one that alarmed Edward the most, was the immense cannon that had been added to the 26 kilometers long battleship. A monstrous thing of black metal and burning ruin that hurt to look at, even through the treachery's warp-focused senses. The twisted machine spirit of the treachery groaned in fear at the sight, and Edward knew then, without a doubt, the purpose for which that weapon had been crafted. To break through the iron cage, to let the Ultramarines outside of the 4th Legion's prison. When Edward had been given the command of the treachery, he had enjoyed the name of the ship. It was a declaration of intent and an insult to the Ultramarines still loyal to Guilliman's memory, an echo of the past shaped into the promise of future glory. But now that source of that name was here, sailing straight on an intercept course towards him. The name suddenly wasn't so funny anymore. Powerful as the treachery might be, it was still no match for the might of a true Gloriana-class battleship, especially one such as the Macragge's Honor, which had been greatly enhanced by the Dark Mechanicum when the heretics repaired her during the Heresy's prolonged campaign. Still, mighty as she was, the battleship was still just one ship, alone against the might of the Black Crusade. It would not be able to triumph, though Edward didn't doubt it would reap a bloody tale before his destruction. His confidence returning, Edward prepared to send the orders that would bring the might of the Armada to bear. But his words died on his lips before he could begin to speak, as the censors of the Macragge's treachery screamed once more. More ships were appearing behind the Macragge's Honor, clad in the livery of the Ultramarines. Legion vessels, all of them. As their names reached Edward, he recognized them as ships thought to have been lost to the warp during the Long War, the Heresy, and even a few that had vanished during the Great Crusade, years before Guilliman even undertaken his fateful journey into the Eye of Terror in pursuit of the previous Dark Master of Chaos. All of them bore the traces of a long time spent in the ruin storm, their hulls warped and their weapons twisted by infernal power, with several lost entirely to the denizens of the warp, reborn in the hell forges of the Imperium into demon ships controlled by the mighty Neverborn. There were dozens of them, and though the Black Crusade fleet still outnumbered them, Edward wasn't so certain of their victory anymore. Then came the transmission, though it wasn't broadcast on any Vox frequency. Instead, it boomed into the heads of everyone aboard the Black Crusade fleet, driving many to their knees with the sheer volume. Edward swayed on his throne under the strength of the voice, crying out in pain for the first time since he had awoken from the surgery that had made him one with the ship. Lord Guilliman has returned. By his will, this petty feud is ended. Submit to him or die. From the chatter across the fleet, Edward was able to piece out that every psyker and witch had sensed the awakening of something monstrously powerful on the surface of Macragge. None of them were coherent enough to identify it properly, though. Alright, you can imagine it's a little bit of a problem. But many had already accepted the voice announcement and believed it to be the Primar Guilliman. Rumors were circulating that Cage was already dead, destroyed utterly by the wrath of the Dark Master reborn, and that the alliance that had been painstakingly assembled over the course of centuries dissolved within minutes, faced with the threat of the Ultramarines' fleet and the arrival of such a powerful warlord. That had happened quickly, far too quickly in Edward's opinion. He suspected there must have been agents loyal to whoever the master of the Macragge's Honor was scattered throughout the Black Crusade, waiting for the arrival of their true lord, so that they could switch sides and bring as many traitors along with them as possible. The few surviving ships of Calgar exulted, reveling in the divine providence that had seen them delivered from certain annihilation, chanting the praises of their spiritual liege and professing their undying loyalty. And just like that, the Black Crusade died before his eyes. Edward watched helplessly as his fleet tore itself apart. Whole warbands defected to the side of the Dark Master or seized the opportunity to settle old scores with their rivals, while others ran for the system's edge, sensing the wind had turned. The Macragge's Honor and her fleet moved in, destroying all vessels, failing to broadcast their change of allegiances, and tore a path directly towards the treachery. The captain knew that he would not be given the chance to turn his coat. The insult to the legion that the flagship represented would not be tolerated. And even if he had, the treachery was screwed only with those most loyal to Gage's vision of a 13 legion freed from the grasp of Guilliman. Even Edward would rather choose death over submission. Some trace of the captain he had once been kindled in his soul as he saw the Armada approach, and he gave the order to abandon the ship, knowing full well that this option was close to him. Tens of thousands of crew fled the Macragge's treachery, using every transport and evacuation pod available, though where those lacking warp capabilities could expect any succor from the other ships, and the system was beyond Edward. To his surprise, all of the bridge crew remained on their stations, even those who weren't physically melded to them. The sight of them filled him with something like pride, something he hadn't felt for hundreds of years. When the Macragge's honor drew close, Edward bent all of his will to guiding the ship into acting as a replacement for the departed crew. The guns of the battleship boomed and unleashed an onslaught that could have ravaged entire worlds. But the shields and hulls of the Gloriana-class vessel absorbed it all with barely any visible damage. Still, he continued firing, even as the main cannon of Macragge's honor charged, causing spikes on the energy readings of every Ocpex at Edward's disposal. He continued to fire, even as one of the Vox officers shouted above the din of alarms, groaning metal and raging fires, telling him that the planet-side battle has stopped, the two legions' armies clashing at the walls of the fortress of Hera, having heard the same proclamation as the fleet. The last thought of Edward de Lincourt was to wonder whether Gage had known this would happen all along. He hoped he had, even if it meant that he had been left to die by his lord. He hoped the sacrificed son had a plan. They faced one another, father and son, Primarch and Space Marine, though neither of them could accurately be described by such limiting terms anymore. Both of them had changed since the last time they had stood on the same world, reforged by cruel fates into beings of power and will rather than flesh and blood. One was the Dark Master of Chaos, chosen of the Dark Gods, and the other was something else entirely. Perhaps something powerful enough to stop what was to come, to prevent all the horrors Robout's return heralded, though that was yet to be seen. Behind them knelt the Lords of Chaos, champions of the Dark Gods, gathered for the Black Crusade and brought to heel by the indomitable will of Guilliman. Bellicor, Master of Shadows and firstborn son of the Chaos of Gods. I was about to say Chaos Gods. Whatever. Cato Sicarius, Warrior King of Espador and Champion of Slaanesh. Castus, Vessel of the Demon Prince Paramides. Titus, the Wrath of Khorne, and Uriel Ventris, the Drinker of Sorrows, who has submitted to no god, yet served them all with his every breath nonetheless. They had come here to destroy Guilliman, to break down the stasis field around his corpse, and end the possibility of his return forever. Each had joined the sacrificed son for their own reasons, united in force rarely seen among the traitor legions. But they had been too late, or rather, it slowly dawned upon them they had been deceived. They all saw things as they looked at the Primarch, at the rent in his chest where the Emperor's sword had run through him. They saw screaming, burning faces, and instinctively knew that these were the souls of all those scions of the 13 who had died in their crusade, reduced to mere kindling, consumed to fuel the resurrection of the Dark Master of Chaos. They understood that they had been manipulated, moved like pawns on a chessboard to bring about the return of Robout Guilliman, and Fury battled with dread within their black hearts. And yet when their leader stood before their arch-enemy and suddenly revealed that he too had been deceiving them from the very start, the only emotion they could feel was shock. They all stared at the red-helmeted space marine who defied the will of Guilliman, and their minds churned and turned in sheer stupefied incomprehension. "Ionoid Thiel," said Guilliman softly, his voice echoing unnaturally into the chamber, as if spoken by all the statues and frescoes at once. Behind the sacrificed son, the Lord of Chaos twitched, as they too recognized the name from the Ultramarine legends. "I do remember you. A sergeant of the 13th chapter, 137th company, the red-marked who led the other cast-offs on Ishvan III, who didn't even have the decency to die when ordered. Such a disappointment you were. And yet, I confess, I did not see this coming. Marius Gage was supposed to be my greatest servant by gathering the mightiest lords among the Ultramarines and bringing them to me, that they may kneel and serve as in their place. That they may kneel and serve, as is their place. Then he too would kneel, and the legion would be reunited under my command. And instead, here you are, a ghost of the past, masquerading as a prince of the warp. How? Wouldn't you like to know? Replied the sacrificed son, and though his helmet hid his face, all could hear the smile on his face. Sure. Cold, vicious, and hungry for vengeance after being denied it for so long. He raised the pistol he held in his left hand, and without hesitation shot directly into the face of the resurrected Primarch. The bolt of plasma tore through the air, superheating the molecules in its path, only to detonate against the sorcerer's barrier surrounding the Dark Master's bare head without causing any damage. Unfazed, Ionoid discarded the weapon, which turned to mist the moment it left his hand, and drew instead another power sword before charging the traitor Primarch, the blade manifesting out of nothingness into his very ready grip. Guilliman raised one of his hands, clad in the talons of might, forged by the Dark Mechanicum in a grotesque parody of the Talon of Horus, granted onto the War Master to mark his ascension on Ulanor. Psychic power surged through him and burst from the claws in a torrent of dark lightning. But instead of throwing Ionoid to the ground in agony, it washed over him harmlessly, cancelled out by another, seemingly equal power. The Archtraitor frowned and went forth to meet his treacherous son's charge head-on. The two warlords clashed with a thunderous boom, blades meeting claw and showers of sparks. Ionoid was far smaller than his Primarch, but he was more agile and his swords were just a little longer than the Talon's claws, allowing him to parry Guilliman's attacks away. Guilliman remained where he stood, while the sacrificed son danced around him, moving faster than any mere space marine should have been capable of doing, dodging blows that not even a master duelist would have seen coming with apparent ease. "What are you?" asked Guilliman, as the two of them fought. "The Ionoid who led the failures of my legion was no psyker. Where did you find this power? To whom did you sell your soul?" Ionoid didn't answer. He just kept fighting, displaying breathtaking skill with every blow and parry. Again and again, Guilliman called upon his mantle of power, unleashing terrible energies against his son, forces that would have vaporized the tank or driven entire crowds to soul-rendering madness. But each time, the attack simply slid off the red mark, and the wrath of the arch-traitor grew with each failure. As it did, his concentration on the other present in the sanctuary waned, and Be'lakor was able to break through the compulsion of his infernal nature. The Master of Shadows stood, clad in the tattered remnants of his glory, eyes blazing with a hatred he had nurtured longer even than Ionoid had his own. Be'lakor cared nothing for the sacrificed son's deceit. Not when the source of all his woes in the last 10 millennia stood before him, alive once more. The sacrificed son leapt backwards as Be'lakor flew towards Guilliman, enveloping his ancient foe and lifting him in the air while unleashing the full measure of his wrath. Guilliman was caught off guard and reacted too late to evade the firstborn, who clawed at Guilliman's armor and sorceress protections. Tears began to appear in the ancient warplate as the Master of Shadows managed to pierce Guilliman's shields, overpowering them through the sheer strength of his hate. For all of Be'lakor's spite, Guilliman's darkling soul had been tempered by an eternity suspended out of time, and his mastery of the war powers had grown 100-fold. The Dark Master struck back, drawing upon his mantle of power to shatter Be'lakor's hold onto the half-reality of the Ruin Storm. Hallowing in tortured rage, the Demon Prince began to dissolve, but Guilliman wasn't done. He reached into the threads of the warp energies composing the very essence of Be'lakor, what had become of his ancient soul after he had been elevated to demonhood countless millennia ago. To mortal eyes, it looked as if the talons were glowing with unholy radiance as they tore through ribbons of smoke, but all those present were so much more than merely mortals. They saw Guilliman rip Be'lakor's essence to shreds, casting him back into the Imperium with his leftover power scattered. This was more than a mere banishment, and only the gods knew how long it would be before the Master of Shadows would be able to gather enough of himself back together to be able to manifest. Not since Bellacor's first confrontation with Guilliman at the heart of the Eye of Terror had the Firstborn been so thoroughly defeated, and his howls of rage at his defeat spread far and wide across the warp, waking his cultists and pawns throughout the galaxy. One thing was different this time, for as the Firstborn vanished, two silhouettes were left behind, emerging from dissipating shadows. They were pale and translucid, but undeniably human, and Robout knew them well. The others in the room knew them too, having seen their likeness in temples dedicated to the Avenging Sun, or in Anoid's case, picts and recordings. Silence fell in the room as all watched, feeling the weight of destiny, in the god's gaze. The ghosts of Connor Guilliman and Tarasha Euten walked towards the one both of them had regarded as a son when they had been alive. The violent banishment of Be'lakor had finally broken the demon's hold onto their souls, and they were free for the first time since that terrible night of blood and fire, when the Firstborn had manipulated the lords of Macragge and orchestrated their deaths, making Robout take his first step on the road to damnation. The Lord of Macragge and his seneschal approached the Primarch, their steps floating a few centimeters above the marble floor. "Robout," they said, and their voice was full of kindness and compassion and understanding, as well as sadness and regret. "It is over. You can stop now. You don't need to go on." Connor's ghost reached out to his son with an imperial hand. A supernatural silence fell upon the scene, as if the gods themselves were holding their breath for what would happen next. "We can help you, my son. You have accomplished what you set out to do. Do you remember? You don't need to listen to them anymore." At the sight of his parents, the face of Robout softened for the first time since he had been imprisoned within his stasis field. The infernal glow of his eyes dimmed. For a moment he appeared almost human again, or at least as human as any Primarch could ever be. "They lied to you," whispered the Eoten's wraith. "They have always lied to you. But you are stronger than they think. You can break from their chains and be free. You can reclaim your destiny." "I know my destiny," said Robout, his voice almost breaking with emotion. "And nothing will turn me away from it. Not even you." The fire in the Primarch's eyes ignited anew. He stood straighter, and the shadows in the chamber seemed deepened. Then Robout Guilliman, Avenging Sun no longer, walked directly through the ghosts of Connor and Eoten, the spirits turning into mist at the contact of his rune-marked armor, with a last pleading mournful cry that went as unanswered as their previous calls. "You actually did it," called out Anoid, and the hatred was gone from his voice, replaced by disbelief and bitterness. Some part of me thought that maybe, just maybe, there's something left in you of the man I admired. I guess I was wrong. That was your parents, you bastard. I'm just thinking about you, Kilkenny, you bastards. Your last chance to turn back from the path you were set upon by their lies. Your last chance to choose, Robout. But there is nothing left, is there? The Dark Gods have taken everything. You really are just a monster now. They took my weakness and filled the void with power, spat back Guilliman. And you are ill-placed to speak such accusations, Anoid. How different from me are you? This power you possess is not something a mere mortal could ever hope to wield. Now enough of these games. If you will not submit, then you will die. Kill him, my sons. The Lords of Chaos groaned and trembled as the will of their Primarch hit them, forcing its way past their mental defenses and into the deepest-rooted obediences that was rewritten into the Space Marines' very genetic code, or gene code. The 4 Chaos Marines rose slowly, hesitantly struggling against the invasion of their thoughts. All of them were strong, but they weren't strong enough, and Robout spoke for the gods to whom their souls belonged. One by one, their resistance faded, and they drew their weapons and began to walk towards the sacrificed sun. Except for Titus. Every second he had spent forced to his knees, his fury had grown. stoked to heights it had never reached before by the humiliation, the loss of control. Of all the Lords of Chaos who railed the Sacrifice Son's banner, only Titus had done so out of desire to destroy all of the 13 Legion. The revelation of Marius' caged true identity had shaken the others, made them reconsider their positions and allegiances in the grand scheme of things. But Titus didn't care. If anything, the revelation that the Sacrifice Son was Eonitaio, the legendary renegade whose infamous deeds were still recounted across the Ruinstorm to this day as a warning to those who would dare betray the legacy of Guilliman, only reinforced his decision to stand with him. Titus screamed in all of his rage and hatred, and even though the Lord of Skull's power flowed into Guilliman along with that of the other Chaos gods, the dark gifts of Titus had earned through his service answered his fury. Power flooded Titus, yes, breaking Guilliman's hold onto his psyche, and the wrath of Khorne launched himself against the 3 former allies, still in the thralls of the Dark Master of Chaos. For Khorne cares not whence the blood flows, only that it does. Even with their minds dominated, the Lords of Chaos, I was about to say Lords of Change, the Lords of Chaos were still great warriors, and they immediately reacted to Titus' assault. Sicarius' infernal blade caught Titus' chainsword and turned aside an attack that would have severed the warrior king's neck, but there was still enough strength behind the blows to send him reeling backwards. Castus Maul flew, and Titus ducked under the blow and struck the back, his weapon's teeth tearing a great rent in the Plague Lord's chestplate, rotting entrails and foul black blood pouring from the wound. When Titus' blade was stopped as it met the strange Xenos sword of Uriel Ventris, the Drinker of Sorrow grimaced under his helmet as he struggled against the terrible strength of the wrath of Khorne, while sparks of alien energies filled the air between the two of them as the field surrounding Uriel's blade met the infernal power dwelling within Titus' chainsword. And all the while, Titus continued to scream in incoherent fury, his rage fueled by every pain, every torment he had suffered at the hands of the 13 Legion, and not even the shackles of the Blood God could stop him. Blocking Uriel in place with the strength of a single arm, he punched the Drinker of Sorrows. I was about to say the Soul Drinker. I really should continue those books. He punched the Drinker of Sorrows with the other, sending him flying directly into one of the Sanctum's columns. Such was the strength behind the blow that the pillar cracked and fell, cutting the Lord of Chaos from the Sacrifice Son, the Lords of Chaos from the Sacrifice Son and the Primarch, in a shower of broken masonry. Uriel forced himself to his feet, ignoring the pain of his bruised bones, just in time to see Titus freeze as the point of Sicarius' sword burst out of his chest. Blood flowed through the wound as the blade sorcery prevented Titus' healing from kicking in. It was clear to all that this was a mortal blow. All but Titus, that is. Instead of falling down and dying, the Wrath of Khorne turned, tearing the sword still embedded into his chest from the hands of the Warrior King. Sicarius could only watch in shock as the warlord he was sure he had slain struck back one last time, his chainsword cutting a bloody trail from Sicarius' left shoulder to his right hip, eviscerating him. The champion of Khorne and Slaanesh fell together. Titus dead before he hit the ground, Sicarius kept in atrocious agony as the demonic power he had claimed from Amniak the Golden surged to heal the terrible wound. And that's unfortunate. I really like Titus in this one. On the other side of the newly formed barrier, the Sacrifice Son laughed. See? Even after everything you have done, everything you have cast aside, there are still some among your sons who can defy your power. How does it feel, Father? Robut turned from the rubble and glared at Anoid. Without a word, he marched towards his son, his talons covered in writhing eldritch energies. The Sacrifice Son raised his blades, and the two of them started battling again. But something was different now. Perhaps it was Guilliman's anger was more powerful than before. Perhaps it was that the Primarch no longer needed to keep part of his attention on holding down the Lords of Chaos. Or perhaps it was that whatever font of power Anoid had been calling it upon was slowly running dry. Regardless of the cause, the sacrificed son was being driven back step by step. Eventually, inevitably, Anoid was too slow. He didn't dodge fast enough, and the first blow he took threw him off balance. The next blow caught him right in the chest. Guilliman's right talon pierced through his chest, and 4 claws bursting out of his back in a shower of blood. The shock and pain, more than the energies ridding the talon than the actual wound, forced Anoid's hands open, and the swords fell, vanishing into thin air before they even hit the ground. "Now you will answer me, insolent cur," growled Guilliman. "How did you gain such might?" "You always love to talk. I see that. At least hasn't changed." Impaled on the talons, Anoid took a shuddering breath before continuing speaking, sounding like a condemned man finally unburdening his conscience. "Here's the truth then. I searched for a long, long time, and finally, I found a way to turn the power of chaos against itself. And with that power, I returned to the Ruinstorm and took up the name of Marius Cage. He was long since dead by then, having offered up his soul to the demon prince Samus, but his name still carried great respect in the 13th Legion. I took it, disguised myself as a demon prince using my new power, and launched the first attack on this world, shattering the Ultramarines' remaining unity in the wake of your fall." Anoid lowered his head, staring directly into the burning eyes of his father. "Ever since then, I have fought against you and your pawns. Without pause, without witness, without hope, without reward, I have fought to keep the galaxy safe from the Ultramarines, ensuring that the chapters remained divided, that the Legion was kept at its own throat. And I have succeeded, father. Do you know what the other traitor legions think of the 13 now? They think you are a joke. They think the last 10 millennia of endless failure are the gods' punishment upon you. And in a way they are right, for the only power I used to accomplish all this was that of chaos itself. Tell me, isn't that funny?" Guilliman laughed, a deep and horrible sound that caused the damaged frescoes and statues to twist in anguish. When his hilarity died down, his voice was thick with contempt. "I suppose it is funny, you pathetic fool. Do you really think you will succeed? Even your defiance you served me, by purging my legion of the weak from its ranks. Now by gathering those worthy of kneeling at my feet. I am the Dark Master of Chaos, and all who bear the mark of ruin are mine. Chaos cannot be turned against itself. Many have tried before you, and they all met the same fate. They ended up serving the powers they hoped to defeat. You are no different." "You are wrong." Anoid laughed weakly, red blood slipping from his mouth with every word. "There is, or rather there was, a way. Or have your masters concealed that from you as well? No, I can see that you know what I speak of. Oh yes, I found it, father. I found the tomb and opened it." "You lie," shouted Guilliman, shaking the sacrificed son, his claws tearing his insides apart. "Yes, I know of what you speak, but it is impossible for that power to be the one you wield. He is dead, dead and gone and forgotten, the very memory of his existence wiped from the universe." "Yes," whispered Anoid, despite the terrible pain. "But the warp forgets nothing, and even dead gods can dream." With a furious roar, Guilliman threw Anoid through the room, sending him flying and crashing on the marble floor. Anoid cried out for the first time in the battle as his spine was crushed inside his armor, and the pain was even greater when the wound healed and the broken pieces of bone and nerve ending were forcefully reconnected. He stayed on the ground, trembling, trying to fight through the pain. Not yet, he thought to himself. I can't just stop yet. Need more time. "It doesn't matter," shouted Guilliman. "Even if you are the avatar of his lingering power, it changes nothing. You will die here, now, and the last dying gasps of that failed god will have been in vain. You are nothing more then one more trial put onto my path by the gods to prove my worth to them before I reclaim my rightful place as the Supreme Lord of Chaos. Slowly, painfully, the sacrificed son rose to his feet. His helmet was done, smashed to pieces by the impact, and his power was nearly exhausted, so he couldn't call upon it to replace the headgear. His face, revealed for the first time in uncounted centuries, was battered and bruised. And yet he was still smiling, and that, more than anything else, made Guilliman wary. You always were so blind, always so sure. You knew what was going on, but now, as before, you are blind. Blinded by your pride, and your certitude everything is about you. I am not the Avatar. Nor was this ever about killing you. Anoid's trembling right hand reached into the pouch at his belt and produced a small cylinder of metal with a red button at one extremity already pushed and a blinking red light on the shaft. Too late, Robout. You are too late. The moment the final word left Anoid's lip, the ground shook, and a fraction of a second later, a monstrous shockwave hit the sanctum. What have you done? Roared Guilliman, fighting to keep his footing as the floor broke apart under the strain of the quakes. The bomb Titus found on Graya, gasped Aonaid. I had my tech priest study it and replicate it, except about 100 times more powerful. They placed it into the temple where we found Belacor. I pressed the detonator the moment I saw you rise up. All that remained was to keep you busy, and not buy enough time for the detonation sequence to reach completion. First I'll fire you, Senoitzkador. And now, tell me, almighty, dark master of chaos, how does it feel to be beaten by the same trick twice? Guilliman howled, almost entirely lost to rage. He could feel the destruction spreading from the detonation, the utter obliteration of hundreds of millions of cultists, and the spreading of the destruction across all of Macragge. He could sense the death of his homeworld and smell his ambition turn to ash alongside the very first world he had ever conquered. But there were still things that could be salvaged. Guilliman drew all of his power to him, and in a godlike feat of sorcery and willpower, reached out to every ultramarine on the planet. He seized them, body and soul, and teleported them aboard the armada holding into orbit above, throwing them into empty holes without caring for their comfort. The warriors from the other legions, who had railed the sacrificed son, were abandoned on the planet, left to urgently call for their ships to send transport to their location before their doom reached them. Very few would survive to reach the vessels, and those would face the difficult decision of choosing what to do next. As for Guilliman himself, he vanished as well, with one last venomous glare at the bleeding, broken form of Aonaid, who was still smiling, even as the sanctum fell to pieces around him. Here he is, he has come. He has risen from his throne, reborn in the blood of his children. By betrayal was he elevated once, by betrayal has he risen again. The great sea screams and the future burns. I see stars turn to ash. I see a rain of death on 1,000,000 worlds. I see the poison of chaos spread through the galaxy's soul. I see doom come for all. I hear the cries of trillion souls caught in eternal torment, the promise of an imperium of chaos. Weep and mourn, children of the Emperor, for hope dies and salvation burns. The galaxy's fire has been lit, and all will scream before the ashes settle. The lost and the damned are coming, a host beyond counting, forged into blade wielded by his single terrible hand. The end is here, and yet I see another. Can it be? O God Emperor, can it be? The sun, he is here. Fire and death. I see the red mark, and I hear the laughter of a man. Then the screams of the gods. I see defiance onto oblivion and the embers of hope rekindled. A victory paid for in blood, the schemes of the great betrayer undone. I hear the cracking of a world, the unmaking of the great nightmare. I see it fall in fires and ruins. Its legacy of evil ended at last. Fallen, all of it, fallen. Macragge is fallen. From the ramblings of Imperial Seer Dominic just before his death from massive cardiac arrest. It sounds like something that would cause that, to be honest. It was done. He could taste blood, ash and dust in his mouth. Every part of his body hurt, and he could feel what he believed to be his own soul slowly falling apart as the last of his eldritch powers were drained. That was good, he decided. This was how a victory like this should feel. Anoid Tile forced himself to his feet as the sanctum collapsed around him, its ancient foundations giving way before the force of the tremors shaking the entire world. A wall collapsed, revealing the exterior. The fortress of Hera was falling apart, and not too far away he could see the temple of Ptolemy tumbling down. The horizon was lit with the light of the unimaginably large explosion that had gutted the world, and the sound of destruction were so loud they were almost drowned out the screams of the dying. Almost, but not quite. Billions were dying, their last moments of terror and panic, as their god returned, only to abandon them to their fate. The sacrificed son took no pleasure in this. For all the bravado he had shown to Guilliman, he too had been born of this world, what seemed like 100 lifetimes. To watch it die even now tore what remained of his heart to pieces. But it had to be done. Didn't it? Macragge was no longer the world he remembered from half-forgotten childhood memories. It had become hell. A place where souls were damned from the very birth, made into servants and sacrifices to chaos. A realm of torments, dedicated to fulfilling Guilliman's made ambitions. Surely it was better to end it, to destroy it all in the fire and deny the arch-traitor the legions of cultists he would have been able to rise from the planet for his new crusade against the Imperium. Wasn't it? So many questions. The truth was, Aranith didn't know. Perhaps it would have been better if he had died all that time ago, during the heresy, instead of surviving and leaving his armor behind for the Alpha Legion to find while he vanished into the shadows of history. Perhaps it would have been better if he had fallen during the 10,000 years that had followed. Better if he had fallen to one of the many, many enemies of mankind he had fought against during these long centuries, and had never found the tomb, buried deep between the black light of that hateful star in that backward sector. Perhaps, yes, perhaps the galaxy would have been better off then. At the very least, with the power of the dead god still trapped within, the tomb would have remained in balance, and would have unleashed its evil upon an entire sector, haunting its worlds with its baleful radiance. So many had died or suffered fates far worse than death as a result of his actions. Words had screamed in the past, present, and future, for the works of the gods were unbound by temporal casualty. Had Guilliman been right in the end? Had all his actions served chaos? No, he did not believe that. He couldn't believe that. He had accomplished so much since he found himself cast into the ruin storm, stripped of much of his humanity by the eldritch powers of that terrible tomb. Knowledge of what was to come had helped him ensure that the Imperium was kept safe from the depredations of the 13th Legion. He was not prideful enough to think he alone had protected mankind from the Ultramarines, but he knew he had played a great part in it. Even if the Iron Warriors would never know it, it was in part thanks to him that the Iron Cage still held. He still remembered that awful moment of revelation, when he had understood what had happened to he had realized that he had been cast through time as well as space. And soon after that revelation had came another one, as he sought the first attack by Marius Cage on Macragge, determined to ensure that things proceeded as he remembered them, only to find that there was no sacrificed son, emerging from the warp to lead the disbelievers of Guilliman's divinity. And so he had done the only thing he could think of. He had become Marius Cage, rather than risk altering the course of history. The 13th Legion had to be broken, and he had done so. It had been disturbingly easy to play the part of Marius, a son betrayed and cast away by his own father, left to burn on the altar of Guilliman's ambition. That was all too familiar to Anoid Tayo. He had rallied the discontents and the cast-offs to him, and together they had shattered the Ultramarines' unity beyond the ability of any chapter master to repair. He had known this would lead to the creation of the Loathed Ones. He had learned of their existence, and this dismal text seized from the 13th Legion cultists during his mortal life. It bothered him how easy it had been for him to sentence those who had been his brothers to such a terrible fate, all so that he could make use of them at a later date. Many a night he had spent in his quarters, darkly pondering just how much of himself had been left after the tomb had been done with him. Centuries later, when the War of the Beast had ended, he had heard the clamors of war as the traitor legions sought to seize the opportunity the orcs had unwittingly provided them. With the Imperium brought to the very brink of collapse by the Greenskins, there was little left to stand in the way of the Chaos Marines. Again, Anoid had acted to protect mankind. But this time, he hadn't done so alone. He had reached out to the Hydra, using frequencies and encryption sequences engraved upon the armor he had entrusted to them, and warned them of what was coming. They had created the Ascended One, the Ultramarine warlord who led the 13th Legion out of the Ruinstorm and directly into the path of the other traitor legions pouring out of the Eye of Terror. One of the 20th's own heroes had volunteered for the part, his entire identity erased and rebuilt through hypno-conditioning, so thorough not even Corvus Corax had been able to see through it when they had faced each other aboard that hateful daemon ship that had become his flagship. Anoid had met the Ascended One only once, in his disguise as Marius Cage, and passed just enough of his power to him that he could pass for a demon prince too. And fool even the Dark Gods as Eonid had. Of course, that power hadn't been enough to face the Raven Lord, which was why the Alpha Legion had made sure that the demon ship had exploded when the two had come face to face. With both their leaders gone, the two forces had destroyed each other, the remnants scattered, an easy prey for a resurgent Imperium. The sons of Alpharius had never known the true nature of their informant. Oh, Anoid didn't doubt that there had been plenty who had suspected it had been him behind the mysterious intel drops and acts of sabotage. But none had learned behind which face he hid in the Ruinstorm. There were only 3 people in all the galaxy who knew what Anoid Tayo had done in the name of duty. Himself, the friend who had journeyed with him in the tomb for reasons of his own, and the Emperor. Often he had wondered what would happen if he left the Ruinstorm, if he sought his former mortal self. Would he even survive outside the Ruinstorm? Could he warn his past self of what was to come? Or had some of the demons he had fought during his long, secret crusade actually been those very messengers, trying to deliver knowledge from the future? In the end, he had abandoned the idea. His destiny was laid before him, to claim the name of Marius Cage in order to hide his own from all, even from the Dark Gods themselves, even from himself sometimes. For centuries he had lost himself to the act, forgotten who he really was, and became the sacrificed son in truth rather than in pretend. He had done terrible things in that state, things that would haunt him until the end, which now seemed close, at last. And what an end it had been. Not only had he deprived Guilliman from his cultist army and his planetary base, he had also made sure that the Imperial prisoners of Mortendar were freed. He had manipulated the forces sent to attack the prison world to help the Imperial captives escape, band together and seize one of the smaller ships, which just so happened to be fully warp capable and crewed by a recently captured navigator whose loyalty was still to the Golden Throne, even after everything she had endured in the Ruinstorm. They would carry word of what had happened at Macragge, and the Imperium would have no choice but to listen. After all, not even the Iron Warriors could ignore the word of a living saint and several Lord Inquisitors among others. The last Osirian had been destroyed too. Had the vile Xenos been left alone on his nightmare planning to torment his thralls, it would soon have mastered his dark gifts, and humanity would have suffered greatly at its hands. By calling it to the Black Crusade, a temptation he knew the alien wouldn't be able to resist, Anoid had ensured that the Changer of Ways was denied one of its potentially most dangerous pieces in the age to come. A small thing, perhaps, when compared to the magnitude of Guilliman's threat. But where the Great Deceiver was concerned, there were no threats too small not to crush while there was still time to do so. Anoid was pulled from his remembrance as the clouds of smoke and dust parted, revealing an unsuspected sight. With the detonation of the warp bomb, the Imperium had been pushed back for a time, and the skies of Macragge showed real stars for the first time since the ruin storm had been unleashed. How long had it been, Anoid wondered, since he had seen the true stars rather than the many-hued madnesses of the warp? Ever since he had arrived in the ruin storm, after his reforging, he had known without knowing why, that to leave the ruin storm would destroy him. Perhaps the paradox of being? Ever since he had arrived, or perhaps the paradox of being in two places at once would be too much. Or perhaps without the energies of the warp, he wouldn't be able to sustain his material form. As he looked to the heavens with a smile on his face, Anoid felt the last of his life burn away. He didn't look down, but he sensed his body dissolve, turning to mist, then to nothing at all. He closed his eyes and let oblivion swallow him. His soul faded as the last of his power was exhausted, consumed by the very fire that had driven him so far. Except for one spark, the tiniest fragment of his soul, a shard of the sacrificed son's core identity. That spark was caught in the psychic wave of Macragge's destruction. It was cast through the raging tides of the Imperium into the depths where the Chaos Gods dare not reach, and surfaced again, in another, more ignorant age, and that spark embedded itself into the newborn body of a son of Macragge, who will grow up under the rule of Roboutian Guilliman, and be chosen to join the Ultramarines once the Great Crusade reached the 500 worlds. And the name of that child now and forever was Anoid Tael. Alone, in one of Macragge's honors observation bays, Roboutian Guilliman watched as the corpse of his homeworld fell to pieces. The ships that had been fighting mere hours ago for control of the planet's orbit were fleeing from it, fearful of being dragged into its fiery destruction. The explosion of the warp bomb was over, and the Imperium was already moving back to reclaim the area from where it had been expelled by the detonation. Tendrils of warp energy seized shards of the world, dragging them deeper into the Sea of Souls. Flocks of Neverborn fed upon the suffering and terror that saturated these lifeless rocks before discarding them and moving on to the next. The rest of the system was also suffering the consequences of Macragge's destruction. The path to glory was no more, and the ancient spells that had preserved the balance of Macragge had unraveled. The remaining demon worlds were once more being fought over by the hordes of the dark gods, with the legions of the blood god fighting through the marshes of Thulium, and the hosts of the changing god flocking to the Laphis gardens. Ardium was already lost to the madness since the passing of the last Osirian, and even the infernal legions of chaos were weary of the slumbering one's power. As for Nova Thulium, nothing had really changed there. The war just went on. The Dark Master of Chaos was alone, for none dared to risk drawing his terrible wrath upon them. The very air was trembling with Guilliman's barely contained fury. The army of cultists he had spent millennia carefully cultivating gone. The ruinous artifacts and secrets they had accumulated, gone. The gene labs and all their relics held in the vaults of the fortress of Hera, gone. In one single blow, Anoid had taken more resources from him than 100 Chaos Lords could ever hope to possess. His plans were in tatters, and though the situation could still be salvaged, he would need to rethink his ongoing campaign completely. And to top it all off, Anowit's soul had vanished. The very thing Robout had done after reaching the Macragge's honor had been to try and capture the shade of the renegade. Such torment he would have visited upon him to punish him for his treachery. But he had found nothing. Anowit's soul had completely vanished upon the destruction of Macragge, and no amount of threats could make the Neverborn swarming around the planet's husk deliver it to him. And so he stayed there, alone, brooded darkly over the ruination of his schemes, while his faithful Tetrarchs worked to bring the armies under his command into order. Until he sensed a new presence. Suddenly, with him in the observation bay, where there had been none before, Guilliman knew this presence. He turned and faced the entity his sons knew as the Gravekeeper. The ancient demon of Nurgle stood tall in its black robes, showing no sign of how he had entered the restricted area of the ship. But Robout didn't care about that. "We had a pact, demon," the Dark Master sneered, fighting to contain his anger. "Fighting against the Neverborn would solve nothing. In return for all the bodies of those who died in the ruin storm, you were to protect Macragge, to ensure that the balance was maintained. Why did you let this happen?" He accused, pointing to the destroyed world visible through the reinforced glass. "The details of our pact were clear," replied the Gravekeeper in a deep, raspy voice. "Macragge would be preserved until you rose from your slumber. You were already risen when the bomb exploded, were you not?" "I kept my end of the bargain, Robout, and our pact is now ended." "I did not forget this," said Robout. "You know everything that occurs in the ruin storm. It was part of your duties as Gravekeeper. You must have known about the bomb, yet you did nothing as it was planted on Macragge, and when Mortendar was lost, then too you did nothing. Do not believe that there won't be consequences for this, scion of the plague god. The demon laughed, a sound wholly inhuman, yet which caused Guilliman no discomfort. "Are you threatening me, Robout?" "Yes," replied the arch-traitor bluntly. "These are the times of ending, demon. This is the prophesied hour for me to return and finish what I started. I will not allow anyone to interfere with my plans. Not even one such as you." My, how scary," chuckled the Gravekeeper. "I can see I am now welcome here, so I will leave. But Robout, I will forgive you this time, since you are clearly not in the best of moods. But you should be more careful in the future. Your position among the courts of chaos is far from being what it was before. You can ill afford to turn potential allies against you." With these words, the Gravekeeper vanished, leaving Macragge's honor in the same way he had arrived. Left alone, Guilliman's mind went back to the exchange he had just had with the servant of Nurgle. He focused not on the words of the conversation, but on what he had seen. Thanks to the blessings of the Dark Gods, his eyes could pierce through the disguise of the Neverborn and see their true form. Yet he had still been unable to see through the Gravekeeper's glamour. Seeing only the hooded silhouette, the demon allowed the rest of the universe to see. And yet, during that final moment when the demon had turned to take its leave, Guilliman caught a glimpse of the creature's hands inside his black robes. They had been skeletal, without any skin, muscle, or tendon left. But there had been something strange. He froze. He remembered now. In that final moment, just before the Gravekeeper had vanished, on one of its fingers, there had been a speck of silver.